Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. President Trump said Thursday he'll impose a 5% tariff on Mexican goods and will keep increasing trade sanctions each month until Mexico cracks down on Central American migrants heading for the U.S. border. The announcement caused the Mexican peso to plunge against the dollar, rattled markets around the world, set off fears of a broader trade war. Trump's tariff threat could derail a trade deal known as the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, negotiated as a successor to NAFTA at Trump's insistence. Trump announced his plans for tariffs just hours after Mexican President Andrés Manuel López Obrador sent lawmakers the renegotiated deal for ratification. In a statement, AMLO condemned Trump's immigration actions and called his slogan, America First, a fallacy. This comes as the Trump administration is reportedly considering a plan to bar anyone who passes through a third country from seeking asylum at the U.S.-Mexico border. The move would effectively prevent most Central Americans from exercising their right under international law to seek refuge status in the United States. Meanwhile, the Washington Post reports about half of the 2,000 unaccompanied minors imprisoned at U.S. border facilities are there beyond a 72-hour legal limit, with many spending more than a week in Border Patrol stations and processing centers. Louisiana Thursday became the 5th state in the nation to enact a 6-week abortion ban when Democratic Governor John Bel Edwards signed the bill that offers no exceptions for rape or incest into law. Meanwhile, Missouri is poised today to become the first state in the nation without a single clinic providing abortions, as a judge in St. Louis weighs a last-minute legal challenge to plans by state officials to revoke a medical license for Planned Parenthood's St. Louis clinic. On Thursday, St. Louis police arrested 17 activists at a state office building as they held a sit-in, protesting, demanding a license renewal. Hundreds more protested outside, chanting, "My body, my choice." This is Kawana Shannon, Director of Surgical Services at Planned Parenthood St. Louis Clinic.
Missouri, please keep your fingers out of our vaginas. Also does vasectomies. Those men are able to come in with no hassle, no problems, no concerns, and they get their vasectomy free of choice with no hurdles to jump over. And then a woman comes in raped by a whole motorcycle gang, and you make her wait 72 hours to think about it.
5 other states have only a single clinic offering abortions: Kentucky, Mississippi, North and South Dakota, and West Virginia. Later in the broadcast, we'll speak with Laura Kaplan, author of The Story of Jane, the legendary underground feminist abortion service. Newly surfaced documents reveal a senior Republican strategist who specialized in gerrymandering was secretly behind the Trump administration's efforts to add a citizenship question to the 2020 census. When the strategist, Thomas Hofeller, died last August, he left behind a computer hard drive full of his notes and records. Hofeller's estranged daughter found among the documents a 2015 study that concluded adding the citizenship question to the census, quote, would be advantageous to Republicans and non-Hispanic whites and would clearly be a disadvantage to the Democrats, unquote. Census officials have estimated 6.5 million people will not respond to the census if the citizenship question is added. This undercount could affect everything from the redrawing of congressional maps to the allocation of federal funding. In a court filing Thursday, plaintiffs challenging the citizenship question accused 2 Trump administration officials of falsely testifying under oath about the Justice Department's motivations for altering the census. The Supreme Court is set to rule within weeks on whether Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross had the authority to add the citizenship question to the census. In northwestern Syria, a Russian-backed offensive by Syria's military on the last rebel-held province of Idlib has intensified in recent days, prompting hundreds of thousands of civilians to flee toward Turkey, where officials have sealed border crossings, leaving refugees to fend for themselves in squalid camps as fighting rages nearby. The UN said Thursday more than 250,000 residents of Idlib and neighboring Hama province have been displaced by fighting in recent weeks, with reports of at least 160 deaths. The Union of Medical Care and Relief Organizations says the toll is even higher, with at least 229 civilians killed and over 700 wounded. North Korea has reportedly executed its special envoy to the United States after President Trump walked away from a summit with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un in February without a deal on denuclearization. A major South Korean newspaper reports the envoy, Hyok-chol, was shot to death by a firing squad in March at an airport outside Pyongyang, along with 4 other North Korean foreign ministry officials, and that a translator at the summit was sent to a forced labor camp for committing a translation mistake. This comes as Kim's sister is said to be lying low on her brother's orders in the wake of the summit's collapse. She hasn't been seen since then. Colombia's Supreme Court's ordered the release of Jesus Santrich, a senior guerrilla commander turned elected official, saying the former rebel could be sworn in as a congressman under the terms of Colombia's 2016 peace accord, which ended more than a half-century of civil war. The agreement grants limited amnesty to FARC rebels who lay down arms and confess crimes, including immunity to extradition. Santrich had been jailed at the request of the Trump administration, which is seeking to try him for cocaine trafficking based on an indictment by federal prosecutors in New York. Santrich's release was a rare rebuke of the Trump administration by the right-wing government of President Ivan Duque. Honduran President Juan Orlando Hernandez was targeted by the Drug Enforcement Administration in a large-scale drug trafficking and money laundering probe that began in 2013. Court documents filed by prosecutors in Manhattan earlier this week are part of an ongoing case against Hernandez's brother, Juan Antonio Tony Hernandez, who was arrested in Miami in November. He's awaiting trial. 8 others were also named in the court documents, including the Honduran Security Minister, Julian Pacheco. President Hernandez is denying the charges. Hernandez is a key U.S. ally in Central America. The Trump administration recognized his 2017 victory in an election that was marred by widespread allegations of fraud. Meanwhile, protests are continuing in Honduras against plans by President Hernandez to privatize health care, pensions, and education. Thousands of teachers, medical workers, and students flooded the streets of Tegucigalpa again Thursday, closing the capital city's airport and drawing tear gas from police.
I am here because people are suffering, because I have students who don't have anything to eat, who come to class hungry. That's
in Brazil,
why I'm here.
Hundreds of thousands of students took to the streets of Rio de Janeiro, Sao Paulo, and other cities and towns nationwide Thursday in a massive protest against plans by the far-right President Jair Bolsonaro to dramatically slash education spending. Bolsonaro dismissed similar protests earlier this month, calling student demonstrators imbeciles and useful idiots. In Bangladesh, police have charged 16 people over the murder of Nusrat Jahan Rafi, a 19-year-old woman who was burned to death at her school after she filed a sexual assault complaint against her headmaster. The case has brought renewed attention to the plight of sexual assault survivors in Bangladesh and the impunity often granted to perpetrators of sexual violence. A police investigator said he'll recommend all 16 of those charged with Rafi's murder face the death penalty. Back in the United States, President Trump ramped up his attacks on special counsel Robert Mueller Thursday, appearing to inadvertently admit that Russia helped get him elected in 2016. Trump tweeted, quote, "Russia, Russia, Russia. That's all you heard at the beginning of this witch hunt hoax, and now Russia has disappeared because I had nothing to do with Russia helping me get elected." Speaking to reporters on the White House lawn, Trump later backtracked from the claim, saying Russia did not help me get elected. At the Chicago Board of Trade, commodity prices for corn and soybeans have soared in recent days as severe weather is continuing to hamper the spring planting season. Farmers across the central U.S. report flooding and an unprecedented string of deadly tornadoes has left millions of acres of farmland impossible to sow. Environmentalist Bill McKibben tweeted, quote, "Normally at this point in the season, 90% of America's corn crop is in the ground. But thanks to the endless rain, it's 58% this year. For soybeans, 29% planted instead of the usual 66%. A hotter planet equals more rain and more drought and horribly stressed farmers," he tweeted. On Capitol Hill, a lone Republican lawmaker blocked a bill Thursday to provide more than $19 billion in disaster relief to U.S. states and territories hit by earthquakes as well as hurricanes, wildfires, and other natural disasters exacerbated by climate change. Tennessee Republican Congressmember John Rose denied unanimous consent to the bill, declaring it too expensive. It's the third time the bill was halted by Republicans on procedural grounds. The bill's virtually certain to pass next week when Congress members return to Washington. It came together after President Trump dropped his demand that lawmakers attach $4.1 billion in border security funding to the legislation. New Hampshire became the 21st state to outlaw the death penalty Thursday, as lawmakers voted to override a veto by Republican Governor Chris Sununu. New Hampshire hasn't carried out an execution in 80 years and is just one prisoner on death row. In Washington, the House Committee on Oversight and Reform will hold a hearing on D.C. statehood next month. It's the first time in a quarter century that a House committee has taken up the issue. In a new Washington Post op-ed, House Majority Leader Steny Hoyer declared his support for statehood, writing, quote, "I was hesitant about D.C. statehood. Now I believe it's the only path forward." In California, a military judge in San Diego ordered Navy SEAL Special Operations Chief Edward Gallagher freed from custody Thursday, citing prosecutorial misconduct in Gallagher's murder trial for alleged war crimes. The judge ruled prosecutors exceeded their authority when they tried to plant computer code in emails in order to find the source of leaks about the case. The court has yet to rule on whether to remove prosecutors or to throw out the case entirely. Gallagher is accused of shooting unarmed civilians in Mosul, Iraq, and killing a wounded captive ISIS teenager fighter by stabbing him with a knife, then staging a re-enlistment ceremony over the dead teenager's body. President Trump signaled he's considering a presidential pardon for Gallagher and other military members convicted of war crimes. And Harold Wilson, who spent 17 years in prison, most of it on death row, for a crime he did not commit, died May 18th from complications of a stroke. He was 61 years old. In 1989, Harold Wilson was convicted of a triple murder and sentenced to death by a Pennsylvania jury. A decade later, Wilson's death sentence was overturned due to ineffective counsel. However, his murder convictions were not reversed, and he remained on death row for years. Finally, in October of 2005, Wilson won a new trial and was acquitted of all charges after DNA evidence proved his innocence. Speaking to Democracy Now! Just after his exoneration, Wilson said he was released with 65 cents and a bus token.
It's like, you know, after 18 years of dealing with the injustice system, all the abuse, the physical, mental abuse, I'm placed back in society with nothing. Just, you know what I mean, the shelter of family. You know, no means of livelihood, no means of support. No financial bank accounts, no credit card, no compensation whatsoever.
And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.